The sound was thunder. 72,000 voices. A tidal wave of cheers and screams that shook the metal scaffolding of Wembley Stadium. Every flash of light from a phone camera looked like lightning striking the darkness. The air itself vibrated, not just with sound, but with energy, the kind that only happens when one man holds the entire world in the palm of his hand. Michael Jackson stood at the center of it all. He was 38, but under the white-hot lights he looked almost otherworldly. The black fedora tipped low, sequin jacket flashing with every breath, that impossible poise of someone both fragile and immortal at the same time. The silver glove shimmered as he held the microphone close to his lips. "Billie Jean is not my lover." The crowd erupted, their chants merging into a single roar that drowned out everything but the beat. His dancers hit their marks. The lights pulsed in sync with every move, and the cameras circling above caught every angle for the live global broadcast. It was perfect, too perfect. Behind the precision, behind the smile, something inside Michael was trembling. He'd done this routine 1,000 times, in dozens of countries, before millions of faces. But tonight felt different. There was a pressure in his chest that no amount of choreography could contain. It wasn't exhaustion. It was something deeper. Something that had been building for years, hiding behind the glitter and the applause. And as he spun, dropped to his toes, and froze in that world-famous pose, hat brim low, spotlight burning, something inside him whispered, "Stop pretending." For half a second, he hesitated. It was almost imperceptible, a tiny delay between beats. But the audience felt it. The dancers froze mid-step, waiting for his cue to continue. The lighting tech glanced at the stage manager. Did he just... Then it happened. Michael lowered the mic, closed his eyes, and didn't move. The music kept going for a few seconds before the band noticed and faltered. The beat staggered, then stopped. The stage lights dimmed, confused by the sudden loss of timing. A cold ripple of silence moved through the air, replacing the roar that had filled it only seconds before. 72,000 people, frozen. The only sound now was the low hum of the amplifiers and the faint buzz of the LED screens flickering across the stadium walls. Michael stood in the center of it all, completely still. The smoke from the stage pyrotechnics curled around his legs like mist. He looked down at his gloved hand, the one that had defined a generation, and slowly clenched it into a fist. The cameras zoomed in. Millions were watching the live broadcast, waiting for the next move. But he didn't dance. He didn't sing. He whispered something. The sound barely caught the mic. A breath, a confession, a secret not meant for the world. "I can't do this anymore." The words echoed faintly through the speakers, carried on a hush that rolled through the crowd. At first, people thought it was part of the show. Michael was famous for his theatrical pauses, for building suspense before the next iconic move. But this felt different. He wasn't posing. He wasn't in character. His shoulders were trembling. The dancers exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a tall man named Travis, took a step forward. "Mike," he whispered through his headset. No response. In the VIP booth, his manager Frank Dillio leaned toward the control booth. "Is this a cue? What's going on?" The stage director spoke into his mic. "Band, hold. Lighting standby. Camera 3, stay tight on him." The camera zoomed in closer, catching the faint glisten of sweat on Michael's forehead. His eyes were wide, distant, not with fear, but something more complicated. A decision. He lifted his head slowly and looked out at the audience. The lights reflected in his eyes, making them seem almost silver. He could see faces, thousands of them, some smiling, some confused, some already recording. For 30 years, those faces had adored him. They'd screamed his name, fainted at his touch, treated him like something between a myth and a miracle. And yet, for all that love, he had never really spoken to them, not as himself. Always as a performer, always behind the mask. Tonight, that mask was cracking. He brought the microphone back to his lips. His voice came out hoarse, fragile. "There's something," he stopped. The crowd leaned in. "Something I need to tell you." The silence in that moment was electric, a silence so thick it swallowed the air. Even the security guards near the barricade stopped moving. A child sitting on her father's shoulders whispered, "Daddy, what's happening?" Michael exhaled slowly. His hand shook. The spotlight on him flickered, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. He took off his fedora. The crowd gasped. It was a simple gesture, but symbolic. Michael never broke character mid-show, ever. Removing the hat was like breaking the fourth wall of his own legend. He placed it on the stage floor gently, like an offering. Then he straightened and looked directly into the nearest camera. "For years," he said, "I've given you everything I have. Every ounce of my body, my voice, my soul." The crowd erupted in cheers, thinking it was a speech of gratitude. But his tone didn't match their excitement. It was too serious, too quiet. He shook his head softly, eyes glistening under the lights. "But there's something you don't know about me." A murmur rippled through the audience. Confused, curious. Michael looked down at the stage, then back at the fans. "Every night I come out here, and you see a version of me. The magic, the show, the perfection. But that's not the whole story." He paused, his voice trembling. "Tonight, I don't want to perform. I want to be honest." People started whispering in the stands. Some lifted their phones higher. Others were frozen, watching the man who had never broken character finally let the real Michael speak. He wiped his face with his sleeve, tears mixing with the makeup under his eyes. His breathing grew heavier. "I've kept something inside me for a long time," he said, gripping the mic tighter. "Something I thought I'd never say out loud." The screens behind him flickered, live close-ups of his face, eyes red, jaw tense. For the first time, the king of pop looked like a man standing on the edge of something bigger than fame. The wind picked up, rustling his hair. A spotlight cut through the haze, bathing him in white light. He took one last breath, closed his eyes, and whispered, "There's a secret I've been carrying my whole life." The crowd gasped. The sound spread like thunder, cameras flashing wildly as if trying to capture the moment truth began. Michael lowered his head, letting the microphone fall to his side. The silence was so total, so absolute, it didn't feel like a concert anymore. It felt like confession. And then he looked up again, his voice shaking but clear, as he spoke the words that would echo around the world. "And tonight, I'm going to tell you." The entire stadium erupted. Screams, tears, confusion. And in that instant, everyone understood that they weren't just watching a concert. They were witnessing history. Michael Jackson, the man who built a wall of music and mystery around his soul, was about to tear it down live before the entire planet. And no one, not his band, not his crew, not even the universe, could have predicted what he was about to reveal. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The stadium had gone deathly silent. Not a murmur, not a cough, not even a hum of restless anticipation. 72,000 people stood frozen, waiting for the next word to fall from Michael Jackson's lips. The king of pop, the man who performed in every corner of the world, who could command entire nations with gesture, now stood alone in a white spotlight, trembling slightly as if the truth he carried might burn through his skin. He inhaled, slow and shaky, and for the first time, his voice didn't sound rehearsed. It didn't sound like a showman. It sounded like a man about to break. "All my life," he said softly, "I've tried to make people happy. I thought if I gave you enough magic, enough music, maybe I'd feel that same joy too." The words weren't lyrics. They were confessions, raw and naked, the kind that didn't need melody to carry their weight. He looked down at the stage floor, where his reflection shimmered faintly in the polished black surface. His gloved hand hovered near his heart, as if holding something fragile in place. "But the truth is," his voice wavered, "for years, I've been performing for you while hiding something from myself." The camera zoomed in tight on his face. His eyeliner had begun to smudge, a single tear cutting down through it. He wasn't trying to wipe it away. "There's a boy inside me," he whispered, "and he's been crying to be heard." Gasps rippled through the audience. The crowd didn't know what to do. Some people wept openly. Others pressed their hands to their mouths. You could hear sniffles echoing through the upper decks like raindrops on a tin roof. Michael looked out across the ocean of faces. Young, old, every race, every country represented in the stands. And his expression softened. "When I was a child," he said, "I never had time to be a child. While other kids were playing outside, I was rehearsing, recording, touring. I loved it. I really did. But I didn't know what it meant to just be me. The big screens around the stadium lit up with old photos, footage from the Jackson 5 era. Him as a small boy with wide eyes and a shy smile. The crowd gasped again, not because of the visuals, but because they suddenly realized this wasn't planned. The media team was acting on instinct, pulling archival visuals as he spoke, improvising the backdrop to his honesty. Michael turned to the audience again, his voice shaking. Sometimes I look in the mirror and I don't recognize the person staring back. I see costumes, lights, masks, but where is Michael? Where's the boy who just wanted to sing because it made him feel alive? He paused, letting the words hang in the air like floating embers. You think I have everything, he said, but you can have the whole world and still feel like you're missing yourself. The spotlight dimmed slightly. A hush swept through the crowd, thick with empathy. He looked smaller now, not because of the stage, but because he had stripped away every illusion of grandeur. He continued, softer this time. There's something else I need to say, something I've never said before. He took a deep breath, eyes glistening under the lights. I don't want to be perfect anymore. The words cracked like glass. The crowd collectively gasped, not in shock, but in awe. All my life, I've been chasing perfection. Every step, every note, every move, trying to give you something flawless. But perfection isn't real. It's a mask that gets heavier every year. And I'm tired. His voice broke on the last word. A woman in the front row began to sob. A man near the barricade shouted, "We love you, Michael." And thousands joined in. Michael nodded slowly, eyes shining. "I know you do," he said. "And that's why I have to tell you this truth." He stepped forward until he was standing at the very edge of the stage, close enough that he could see the faces of the people who had waited all their lives to be this near to him. I've spent years trying to live up to something impossible, trying to be magic, trying to be myth. But the truth is, I'm human. I get lonely. I get scared. I get lost. And sometimes... He stopped. His voice trembled. Sometimes I don't know who I am when the music stops. You could hear a pin drop. Even the security guards had stopped scanning the crowd. The entire stadium, tens of thousands of people, were hanging on his every breath. He looked toward the night sky above Wembley, where a soft mist had begun to settle. "When I was a little boy," he said quietly, "I used to pray every night that my voice would never leave me, that maybe if I kept singing, I'd never feel alone. And for a while, that worked, until one day I realized I'd built a world full of sound to cover up the silence inside me." The line echoed through the speakers like poetry. The audience erupted into gentle applause, not for performance, but for truth. He lowered his gaze, smiling faintly through tears. "But tonight, I don't want to sing to hide. I want to sing to heal." Then, without warning, he sat down, cross-legged, right in the middle of the stage. The crowd gasped again. No artist in history had done this at the height of the show, not during a broadcast being watched by millions. He took off his microphone headset and held the handheld mic in both hands like a prayer. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been keeping one secret for too long," he said. "It's the reason I've written every song, every lyric, every note you've ever heard from me." He looked directly into the nearest camera, straight through the lens, straight into the hearts of everyone watching. "Every song I've ever written was for my father." The crowd gasped. Michael closed his eyes. He never told me he was proud. Not once. Every time I danced, every time I sang, I hoped that maybe this would be the moment he'd say, "That's my boy." His voice cracked, but he never did. He looked down, tears streaming freely now. "So I spent my whole life trying to make the whole world love me, because I couldn't get love from the one person I wanted from most." It was a confession so raw, so painfully human, that even the security staff were crying. The crowd began chanting softly, "We love you, Michael," over and over, a rhythmic wave of compassion that filled the night air. Michael raised his head, smiling weakly through his tears. "You see? That's the beautiful thing. You all became the family I never had. You gave me what I was missing, love. The crowd roared with emotion, some screaming, others sobbing uncontrollably. He took a deep breath, voice growing steadier. "But I realized something tonight," he said. "I can't keep living for applause. I have to live for peace. And peace starts with truth." He rose to his feet slowly, his silhouette framed by the soft blue lights. "So tonight, I want you to remember something. Not about fame, not about money, not about legends. Remember this. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to be real." The crowd screamed his name again, louder, raw, deeper this time. He smiled faintly, whispered, "Thank you," and lifted the microphone once more. "Now," he said softly, "let me sing what I've been too afraid to say." The piano began to play the first gentle notes of You Are Not Alone. And for the first time, Michael sang not as a superstar, but as a man telling the truth. His voice cracked, wavered, trembled, but it didn't matter. The audience didn't want perfection anymore. They wanted him. The sound of 72,000 people singing the chorus back to him rose into the night, echoing through London and across every television screen on Earth. Michael smiled through tears, whispering between verses, "Thank you for hearing me." The song wasn't just music anymore. It was confession, communion, healing. And when it ended, the world knew nothing about Michael Jackson or the meaning of fame would ever be the same again. The final note of You Are Not Alone lingered in the air like smoke. It wasn't just a song anymore, it was a pulse. Michael stood there, chest heaving, head bowed, his sequin jacket catching the blue stage lights. His tears glimmered as he gripped the microphone with both hands, trembling. And then something extraordinary happened. 72,000 people, the largest concert audience of his career, didn't scream. They didn't chant. They didn't move. They just stood there, motionless, holding their breath, as if they were afraid that even a whisper might shatter the fragile holiness of the moment. The silence was deafening. Cameras panned across the crowd. You could see faces streaked with mascara, jaws trembling, hands over hearts. A woman in the front row was sobbing uncontrollably into her friend's shoulder. A young man, no older than 15, held up a handmade sign that simply said, "You're not alone either." Michael looked up slowly, scanning the sea of faces illuminated by stage light and tears. "You hear that?" he whispered into the mic, voice hoarse. "That's the sound of love." The crowd erupted. The stadium exploded into light. Tens of thousands of phones, candles, lighters, whatever people could raise. A galaxy of human connection flickered to life in the dark. It wasn't hysteria anymore. It was devotion, raw and pure. "We love you, Michael," someone shouted. Michael smiled through tears, the faintest upward curl of his lips. "I love you more," he said, the words trembling, sincere and almost childlike. The wave. It started in the front rows. A chant, soft at first, grew from a handful of voices into thousands. "Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael." Within seconds, it rolled to the stadium like thunder, echoing off the steel beams and ricocheting into the night sky. Michael covered his face, overwhelmed. For years, he had lived for applause. But this wasn't applause. This was gratitude. He took a few steps back, looking up at the big screens displaying the words "Live World Broadcast." He knew millions were watching. People in Tokyo, New York, Paris, Johannesburg, all seeing him not as an icon, but as a man stripped bare before his audience. He exhaled. "You've all given me something I thought I'd lost," he said softly. "Faith." The crowd roared again, but this time, the sound was less a scream and more a collective cry, like the release of generations of emotion bound up in this one figure, this one fragile human being who had carried the world's expectations on his shoulders for decades. A fan near the barricade yelled, "You save U.S. Michael," and others echoed it until the phrase rolled to the stands like a hymn. Michael closed his eyes. "No," he whispered into the mic, "you saved me." The crowd went wild. The broadcast, back in the control room, producers were in chaos. The concert was airing live in over 50 countries, and the phones were ringing nonstop. Some executives were terrified. "Cut to commercial," one shouted, but others knew what they were witnessing was bigger than ratings. "Are you seeing this?" one BBC commentator said on air, his voice trembling. This This isn't a performance. This is a revelation. Across the world, people stopped what they were doing. In living rooms, bars, and late-night cafes, screens glowed with the image of Michael Jackson standing alone, crying beneath a single spotlight. In Tokyo, a crowd of fans gathered outside Shibuya Crossing, watching on a giant screen. In New York, Times Square had gone still. Even in Rio, thousands stood glued to their televisions. It wasn't a concert anymore. It was an event that transcended geography, a confession shared across continents. Twitter didn't exist yet. Instagram didn't either. But if they had, the world would have broken that night. Instead, the moment spread the old-fashioned way, through word of mouth, through phone calls, through news anchors struggling to find words for something no one had ever seen before. CNN called it the night Michael Jackson became human. The BBC headline would read the next morning, "The man behind a mirror speaks. The music returns." Michael turned toward his band, still frozen in place, and nodded gently. "Let's finish this together," he said softly. Keyboardist Brad Buxer wiped his eyes and began to play a slow, haunting chord progression. Not from the set list, not from any known song. It was something spontaneous, a melody born from the emotion of the moment. Michael lifted the mic again and began to hum, a soft, trembling sound, wordless, yet impossibly beautiful. His voice cracked on the first note, but the crowd didn't care. They cheered louder. He began to sing lines that weren't written anywhere. "I tried to hide in the music, but tonight the music found me." The audience wept. The lyrics flowed like a stream of consciousness, part prayer, part confession, part rebirth. Each word felt unscripted, pure. He wasn't performing now. He was channeling. When he finished, he whispered, "That's for the boy inside." And the stadium, 72,000 people, erupted again in one voice. "Michael, Michael, Michael." The chant grew louder, rolling through the stands, through the corridors, even out into the London streets. People outside who couldn't get tickets joined in, their voices echoing through the night air. It wasn't hysteria anymore. It was communion. The audience transformed. Cameras caught the faces of people who had arrived hours earlier expecting spectacle. Lasers, fireworks, flawless choreography. Now standing motionless, hands clasped, tears running down their cheeks. A mother held her young son close, whispering, "That's what courage looks like." A group of teenage girls sobbed together, holding each other. Even the security guards, hardened men trained to remain stoic, had tears in their eyes. Backstage, dancers and crew watched from the wings, stunned into silence. Some were kneeling, heads bowed. Others held hands. They all knew they'd just witnessed something that would live forever. Michael stood center stage, completely still again. Only this time, he wasn't hiding. He wasn't pretending. The trembling was gone. His breathing had slowed. There was peace in his face, a kind of peace that comes only when truth is finally spoken. He looked out at the endless sea of lights and said, barely above a whisper, "You've given me back my soul tonight." The moment immortalized. A single camera drone hovered above the stage, capturing the shot that would become one of the most iconic images in music history. Michael Jackson, head bowed, hand over his heart, surrounded by an ocean of lights. Behind him, smoke curled upward like incense. The stadium looked less like a concert and more like a cathedral. Later, that image would appear on the front page of nearly every newspaper in the world. It was titled simply, "The Night Truth Took the Stage." The final word. Before leaving, Michael turned back to the microphone one last time. The band had gone silent again. He looked directly into the camera, his expression soft but resolute. "Don't ever be afraid to tell your truth," he said, "because the world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more honest ones." He stepped away, handed his microphone to a nearby crew member, and disappeared into the darkness of the stage wings. The crowd didn't move. They stayed standing, clapping, crying, whispering his name long after he was gone. Outside, as thousands of fans spilled into the London night, a chant echoed through the streets, quiet at first, then swelling into something enormous. "You are not alone." And from that night on, the phrase stopped being just a song. It became a promise. between an artist and his audience, between a man and his truth, between humanity and the healing power of vulnerability. For the first time in decades, Michael Jackson wasn't just a king of pop. He was one of them. And the world, for a few perfect minutes, stopped breathing. By midnight, the world was already on fire, not from the pyrotechnics that used to define Michael Jackson's concerts, but from the shockwaves of truth that had just torn through it. News stations scrambled. Cameras replayed the footage. Broadcasters spoke in reverent tones usually reserved for world events, not pop concerts. Twitter didn't exist yet, but it didn't matter. This moment traveled faster than technology. It was on every front page, every channel, every mouth. Michael Jackson had stopped his own show to tell the truth. And nothing, not music, not fame, not even the myth of Michael himself, would ever be the same again. The world in shock. Backstage at Wembley, chaos reigned. Crew members whispered in disbelief, half in awe, half in confusion. The producers, drenched in sweat, were pacing the control room floor, fielding calls from broadcasters around the world. The live feed had aired uninterrupted, no censorship, no delay. Every word had gone out exactly as Michael said it. One of the technicians looked at his monitor and murmured, "It's trending everywhere. News outlets are cutting their regular programming." "Trending?" Another scoffed. "It's not trending, man, it's history." Down the hall, Michael sat alone in his dressing room. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. His jacket was draped over a chair. His makeup had smudged. His hands were still trembling. For the first time in years, he felt light, exhausted, but light, like a man who had been carrying a mountain on his back and finally set it down. There was a soft knock on the door. "Michael?" It was Karen Fay, his makeup artist and longtime friend. "Can I come in?" He nodded faintly. She stepped in, her face still red from crying. "You okay?" He gave a small, tired smile. "I don't know. Maybe for the first time, I actually am." She sat beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Do you realize what you just did out there?" Michael shrugged. "I didn't plan it, Karen. It just came out. I've been holding it in for so long." Her eyes softened. "You didn't just sing tonight, Michael. You spoke, and people heard you." He turned toward the mirror. His reflection looked different somehow. Not the icon who stared back before every show, but a man stripped bare. The glitter, the perfection, the myth, all gone. Just him. He leaned forward, whispering to his own reflection. "You told the truth. Don't run from it now." The media explosion. By dawn, the headlines were everywhere. Michael Jackson's shock confession stops the world. King of Pop speaks from the heart. A moment of pure humanity in front of 72,000. CNN replayed the clip on loop. BBC called it the most honest moment in music history. Time magazine's editorial board convened overnight to reprint their upcoming cover. One host on a late-night show said, "Tonight, Michael Jackson didn't just perform. He detonated the illusion of perfection, and the world fell in love with him all over again." But not everyone understood it. Some critics accused him of manipulative vulnerability. Others said it was a breakdown. One psychologist on a morning show called it a cry for help disguised as a revelation. But the people who were there, who had felt that silence, that sacred connection, knew better. They started writing letters. Thousands of them, from all over the world. "You made me realize I don't have to hide my pain. You reminded me that it's okay to tell the truth. I've lived my whole life pretending I'm okay. Tonight, I cried for the first time in years." By the end of the week, Michael's management team had received over 40,000 handwritten letters, more than any artist in modern history. Inside the storm, inside Michael's camp, his staff was divided. His manager, Frank Dilio, was furious. "You can't just say stuff like that live on air. Do you know what the press will do with this?" Michael just looked at him, calm, almost serene. "They'll do what they always do. But I didn't do this for them." Frank sighed, rubbing his forehead. "We've got sponsors, networks, deals." Michael stood up, his tone soft but final. "Frank, sometimes you have to choose between your deals and your soul." Frank fell silent. The global response. The next night, while London slept, something unprecedented happened. Across cities, New York, Tokyo, Berlin, Sao Paulo, people gathered spontaneously in public squares, watching replays of the concert projected on giant screens. In Paris, thousands stood outside the Eiffel Tower, holding candles as the broadcast replayed Michael's confession. In Los Angeles, fans crowded Hollywood Boulevard, singing "You Are Not Alone" through tears. It wasn't a fan movement anymore. It was a collective catharsis. The world hadn't just witnessed a pop star bare his soul. It had seen itself reflected in him. One London journalist put it perfectly. For one night, the entire planet spoke the same language, truth. The people closest to him. In Encino, Katherine Jackson watched the replay from home, a hand over her mouth. When it ended, she whispered through tears, "That's my son. That's my baby finally telling the world who he is." In Gary, Indiana, a retired factory worker, his father, Joe Jackson, turned off the TV midway through the broadcast. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. That silence would follow him for years. The quiet after the storm. 3 days later, Michael disappeared from public view. His team told the press he was resting. But the truth was simpler. He was reflecting. He spent the next week in a small countryside retreat outside London. No entourage, no cameras, no noise. Just nature, notebooks, and a single piano. He wrote constantly. Words poured out of him. Half lyrics, half confessions. Pages filled with sentences like, "The truth is frightening because it burns everything false. Love is the only mirror that tells the truth. Maybe perfection isn't what they want. Maybe it's me." His assistant, Grace, would bring him tea in the mornings. She later said she'd find him sitting by the window at dawn, humming softly, tears glinting on his cheeks. "Are you okay?" she asked once. He smiled faintly. "I think I'm learning how to be." The cultural earthquake. By the end of the month, the ripple effects had gone far beyond music. Therapists reported spikes in clients, citing Michael's confession as inspiration to finally open up. Churches and community centers held truth nights, where people gathered to share personal struggles. Time magazine's cover featured a close-up of Michael's tear-streaked face with the headline, "The Moment Fame Found Its Soul." For the first time in decades, Michael's name wasn't associated with controversy, lawsuits, or rumors. It was associated with courage. One op-ed in The Guardian summed it up best. He didn't break down. He broke open. And through that opening, the world saw itself. The return to the stage. 10 days after Wembley, Michael returned to rehearsals. The crew expected tension, but instead he arrived early barefoot, wearing a white shirt and jeans. No security entourage. No fanfare. He looked around the empty stage and said softly, "Let's make music again." But the show wasn't the same. He cut several grandiose numbers and replaced them with quieter moments, stripped-down versions of his songs, sung with new purpose. When his band asked him why, he said, "Because the world doesn't need louder songs. It needs truer ones." That night, during the first rehearsal, he sang Man in the Mirror differently, not as an anthem, but as a whisper. By the end, everyone in the room was crying. The message he couldn't unsay. When his manager asked if he'd take back what he said, just for the record, Michael shook his head. "No," he said, "I meant every word." He paused, looking out over the empty seats of the arena, where he'd soon perform again. "For the first time in my life," he added softly, "I wasn't performing. I was living." And with that, he smiled, small, genuine, peaceful. The storm had passed. The fire had burned. The illusion had cracked. And through that fracture, light had poured in. Years later, when people spoke about Michael Jackson, they didn't just talk about Thriller, Billie Jean, or the moonwalk. They talked about that night. The night the music stopped. The night he laid down the mask and spoke from his soul. The night the king of pop became simply Michael. They called it the Confession Concert. And its echo never faded. The years that followed, months after the Wembley revelation, something remarkable began to happen. The world didn't just forgive him. It understood him. Fans who once came for the spectacle now came for something deeper. His shows changed. The fireworks dimmed. The choreography softened. But the energy, that unspoken current that connected him to his audience, became stronger, purer, almost spiritual. When he walked on stage now, people didn't scream for him. They breathed with him. He no longer chased perfection. Instead, he sought presence. Each note, each breath, each word carried something sacred. The weight of truth. During one concert in Munich, before performing Heal the World, he looked out over the audience and said softly, "Do you know what happens when you tell the truth? The world doesn't end. It begins again." The crowd wept. The movement that followed. After the Wembley concert, a global campaign formed, not organized by record labels or PR teams, but by fans. They called it the Mirror Project. It began as a simple online forum where people shared personal stories inspired by confession, stories of secrets, shame, and healing. Within 6 months, it had grown into a worldwide network of millions, a movement of truth-telling and self-acceptance that transcended race, age, and language. In schools, teachers played clips of Michael's speech, using it to teach about vulnerability and empathy. Psychologists referenced it in therapy sessions. Spiritual leaders quoted him in sermons. For the first time, a pop concert had become a blueprint for emotional honesty. As one journalist in Rolling Stone wrote, "He didn't preach, he confessed." And somehow, that confession became everyone's redemption. The art that came after. The following year, Michael returned to the studio, but something in him had shifted. Gone were the grand production meetings, the battles over beats and market trends. This time, he recorded alone, barefoot, lights dimmed, surrounded by candles and old notebooks. The first song he wrote was titled Truth. It wasn't a hit in the commercial sense. No choreographed video, no massive rollout, but it became one of his most critically acclaimed pieces. A simple piano, a heartbeat-like rhythm, and lyrics that cut straight through the noise. You can paint a smile and call it grace, but only truth can light your face. I ran from love, I ran for me, till the music stopped and set me free. When the track debuted, critics called it his most human work. One reviewer wrote, "This is not Michael Jackson the performer. This is Michael Jackson the person, and that's infinitely more powerful." For once, there was no controversy, no spectacle, just peace. The reunion with himself. In his final years, Michael spent more time in quiet places, hospitals, orphanages, schools. He'd often arrive unannounced, sometimes in disguise, sometimes openly, carrying boxes of gifts, books, instruments. But unlike before, he didn't just perform for the children. He sat with them, talked to them, listened. One nurse at a children's cancer ward recalled. He told them, "When I was your age, I wanted someone to just listen. I'm here to listen." Then he stayed for 3 hours, talking about dreams, music, and courage. He left behind no press, no entourage, just warmth. When asked why he was doing it, he smiled and said, "Because I know what silence feels like, and I never want anyone to feel alone." The world remembers. After his passing, that night at Wembley became the defining moment of every tribute, every documentary, every mural painted in his honor. Filmmakers revisited the footage, freezing the frame where Michael stood beneath the white spotlight, eyes closed, hand over his heart, tears glistening like diamonds. It became one of the most iconic stills in music history. Every anniversary of that night, fans around the world would gather in candlelight vigils. They'd sing You Are Not Alone and replay his words on giant screens. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to be real. And every year, the crowd got bigger. People who weren't even alive in 1997, people who'd only seen the clip on YouTube or documentaries, came just to feel that same energy, that same peace, that same collective breath of truth. The scholars and the saints. Years later, universities studied it. Professors in psychology, theology, and media theory wrote papers about what they called the Jackson effect. The moment vulnerability became a cultural currency. One Harvard lecture opened with the line, "When Michael Jackson chose truth over perfection, he redefined what strength looks like." Another professor said, "He did what philosophers and poets have tried for centuries. He made humanity contagious." Even spiritual leaders spoke of it. In a televised sermon, Archbishop Desmond Tutu once said, "He showed us that truth, when spoken with love, can turn an entire planet into a sanctuary." The last recording. In his final months, Michael recorded a spoken word message, never intended for release. It was found years later in a studio vault labeled simply Truth Tape. In it, his voice was calm, gentle, older, wiser. "I spent my life trying to make the world believe in magic," he said. "But magic was never the moonwalk or the glitter or the fame. Magic was what happened when I told the truth, and people didn't run away." He paused. You could hear the faint sound of him laughing softly. "If you remember me," he said, "don't remember the spectacle. Remember the silence. That's where I finally found myself." Those words were later engraved on a memorial outside the rebuilt Wembley Stadium, right beneath a bronze statue of him standing with his hand over his heart. The plaque reads, "He stopped the music, and the world listened." The immortal moment. Decades later, the footage of that night still plays. Projected on giant screens at tribute concerts, taught in schools, replayed every time the world needs reminding that vulnerability is not weakness. The night the king of pop stopped pretending and started feeling became one of the most replayed broadcasts in human history. Because that night wasn't about fame. It was about truth. It wasn't about Michael Jackson, the legend. It was about Michael, the man. A man who stood in front of millions and said, "I'm tired of being perfect." A man who showed the world that honesty could heal more deeply than any song. A man who proved that sometimes the loudest message you can give the world is a whisper. The final image. The camera fades to black and white. Michael stands on the edge of the Wembley stage. The spotlight behind him casts his shadow long across the smoke. In front of him, a sea of candlelight, thousands of glowing orbs held by trembling hands. He closes his eyes, puts a hand over his heart, and whispers the same words he said that night. "Now you know who I really am." The crowd answers softly, "We love you, Michael." He smiles, that same small, peaceful smile. The lights dim. The music fades. The image freezes. And across the bottom of the screen, in quiet white letters, appears the sentence that defines him forever. Real magic is truth. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.